All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Supply Chain Now Radio. We are broadcasting live today from the supply chain capital of the country of Atlanta, Georgia. In fact, we're here at the Metro Atlanta Chamber this morning. My name is Scott Luton. I'm your host for today's session. In today's live webinar, we're going to be gaining insights on three key fundamentals for optimizing the success of your supply chain. Our guest speaker today is Gary Smith, Chief EAM and SCM with New York City Transit. More about Gary in just a moment, but I can tell you you're in for a treat. As always, we're glad to have you with us here today on Supply Chain Now Radio. So first, let's tackle our ground rules. All attendees will be on mute as we're looking to optimize the audio experience. Now, with that said, let's make it as interactive as possible. So please do submit your questions via the chat toolbar, and we'll answer as many as we have time for at the conclusion of today's webinar. Finally, a PDF of today's presentation and the recording will be available in the next few days to each of our attendees. And if we'll move forward to slide 3, please. So let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors here on Supply Chain Now Radio. Big thanks to our sponsor, Apex Atlanta, which has been serving the Metro Atlanta community since 1964. Apex Atlanta is a nonprofit industry association dedicated to the supply chain management space. To learn more, visit us at apexatlanta.org. And are we able to move the slides forward?
No.
Okay. I like good, frank answers. We'll give that just a second. And you can also use page down, page up, or right click of your mouse if those might work. There we go. All right. So we covered our ground rules. We covered Apex Atlanta, and now one last high five to give. Big thanks to our sponsor, Talent Stream, a WeBank certified recruiting and staffing firm that specializes in helping organizations find top talent in the engineering, the manufacturing, and supply chain space. To learn more, you can visit us at talentstreamstaffing.com. Okay, as I mentioned to our audience, you're all in for a treat. We've got a wonderful speaker here today in Gary Smith. Longtime friend and thought leader, an ASCM leader, Apex leader, and his first time as a webinar presenter here on Supply Chain Now Radio. So a little bit about Gary. Gary has spent his entire career in supply chain management and is currently Chief EAM SCM Division of Supply Chain Division of Supply Logistics for New York City Transit. You also hear him refer to that as NYCT, which is a subsidiary of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, also known as the MTA. Y'all know we love our acronyms in supply chain. So in this position, Gary supports the Division of Supply Logistics in the All-Agency Enterprise Asset Management Initiative, focusing on the supply chain management workstream. And I'm sure he'll share more about his responsibilities in this area. Gary also oversees the design and implementation of plans for new supply chain systems based on best practices. He also monitors consultant activity and support, as well as overseeing and managing post-implementation requirements. Gary holds no shortage of supply chain certifications. In fact, he holds the following 3 certifications at the fellow level. He is certified in production and inventory management, CPIM-F. He is certified supply chain professional, CSCP-F. And also, Gary is certified in Apex and ASCM's newest certification, which is certified in logistics, transportation, and distribution, CLTD-F. Again, of course, with our great Apex organization. He's a member of the CLTD Certification Committee and has been a regular contributor to Apex magazine. Gary holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Management from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Go Yellow Jackets. And with all that said, please join me in welcoming Mr. Gary Smith.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the wonderful introduction, and hopefully I think we've got technical glitches out of the way there. But welcome everybody to Catching Excellence, 3 fundamental requirements for successful supply chain. Again, I'm Gary Smith, and let's get started. We'll, as a brief overview of our agenda, I got a little bit more to talk about myself. Then we'll immediately get into talking about fundamentals and excellence. A little bit about supply chain in everyday life and how it touches all of us. Some characteristics common to all supply chains. And then we'll talk about the 3 fundamental requirements for long-term success. We'll wrap up by talking about how to catch excellence and some concluding thoughts. So with that, let's get moving. A little bit more about myself. As Scott said, I've been in supply chain my entire life, and I just consider myself a supply chain guy. Spending my entire career in supply chain as a manager, consultant, thought leader, and thought leader in both the public and the private sectors. So I've seen both areas, and I understand both both public issues and private sector issues. And in my current role as Chief of Enterprise Asset Management and Supply Chain Management for New York City Transit, my job is to identify and implement the most appropriate concepts, tools, equipment, systems, and best practices for the Division of Supply Logistics where I work, and implement them to minimize total cost of operations, minimize cycle time, and maximize accuracy in order to narrow the gap between effort and accomplishment. So let's talk about fundamentals and excellence. For those of you who are over the age of 50, you may recognize this gentleman. This gentleman was one of my heroes growing up in Wisconsin. His name is Vince Lombardi. He was the head coach of the Green Bay Packers from 1959 to 1967. And he led the Packers to 3 NFL championships and winning both Super Bowls 1 and 2. Also, the Vince Lombardi Trophy, which is the trophy given to the winner of the Super Bowl, was named after him. He was also known for his focus on winning, on excellence, and on the fundamentals. And he's the one I drew inspiration from for this presentation. He said, one of the things that he said was, excellence is achieved by mastery of the fundamentals. And he was one of these people that was blocking, tackling, that's will win you games. He also said, perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence. And that's where I borrowed the title of this presentation, because our focus here is to talk about the 3 fundamentals that are necessary for successful supply chain management. So as we move on, we find out that supply chains are everywhere. And when we were putting together the requirements for the CLTD, the Certification in Logistics, Transportation, and Distribution, a couple of years ago, we had our facilitator asked us to put together a supply chain elevator speech. And the idea being that this is how you explain supply chain to a non-supply chain person in the time it takes for a typical elevator ride. And while you'll notice that this definition is kind of rambling a little bit, you'll also understand that it was created by a committee. It wasn't, but it does have the fundamentals of what we need to describe a supply chain. Starts out, every organization has a supply chain. the most efficient and effective ones are closed loop systems for moving, storing, and configuring products, starting with raw materials and ending with a satisfied customer. Whether it is moving information or physical goods, nothing happens until something moves. The focus in that whole process is two things, as far as I'm concerned. Every organization has a supply chain, and nothing happens until something moves. So we find supply chains in every organization. You find them in the private sector, primarily in manufacturers, but also in retailing and e-tailing. Also, companies that sell a service, they all have supply chains. However, you can also find them in the public sector. Federal, state, and local governments have, all have their supply chains. As I said, New York City Transit, which is the largest bus and subway transportation mass transit mover in the United States, has a tremendous supply chain, and nobody ever really thinks about. But our supply chain is to move material that is used in the repair and maintenance of buses and subways, and we have about 6,000 subway cars and about 6,500 buses. We've got to keep those in a state of good repair. So our warehousing and supply chain focuses on getting that material from our suppliers through the system to the bus depots and subway barns where they're worked on and where they're repaired, so they can get out in the field and move the 8 million people a day that we move in the city. Also, you'll find in the public sector, nonprofits all have supply chains. One of the most famous ones, if you really think about it, is the Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts, and they sell, I think it's in the billions of dollars worth of cookies now, and it's basically ordering and delivering within a 3-month, basically within a 3-month period. And it's a fascinating thing. If those of you who might remember, Abe Ashkenazi wrote in, I think it's Supply Chain Now, his weekly address about the Girl Scouts and their supply chain not too long ago. Also, you'll find supply chains in non-governmental agencies. One of the, including the United Nations. So virtually any organization that provides materials, services, or information has a supply chain and needs to deal with the issues common to all supply chains. They say that the best supply chains are simple. However, many people believe that simple implies manual. Manual implies paper-based. Paper-based implies slow, and slow implies outdated. And if this describes your supply chain, I doubt you will consider it one of the best. So we'll take this comment and say that the best supply chains are simple, and let's reject that. Let's come up with a little bit better description. What I like to think of is that the best supply chains are simple in concept. If they're straightforward and logical, if they minimize processes by leveraging decision support systems and automation, they leverage best practices that are applicable to the organization. Now, understand what I mean by that is that there are a lot of best practices out there that may not be applicable to what your organization's goals are. So you need to leverage the ones that are practical or that are applicable. And that they incorporate principles of continuous improvement and lean. They also use critical thinking concepts. and KPIs that are known to all. And what I mean by that is everybody from the president of the company down to, ideally down to the warehouse worker, should understand and know how KPIs are calculated and what they mean. And finally, that the best supply chains are scalable, that they can move from a very small supply chain to a very large supply chain and fairly rapidly. Let's talk about two of the concepts that I just talked about real quick and give a little bit of focus to those. The first one is continuous improvement in lean. Continuous improvement, according to the APICS dictionary, is the act of incremental and regular improvements and upgrades to a process or product in search of excellence. It usually incorporates the concepts and tools of lean, meaning, focusing on inventory reduction, and Six Sigma, which focuses on quality. Lean Six Sigma has its roots in the Toyota production system and in Six Sigma quality. It's a combination of PPS, which focuses on reducing inventory and working process and overall processes, excuse me, and Six Sigma, which is a quality assurance process that has its roots in Motorola in the 90s. Putting that together, that leverages the DMAIC methodology of define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Both of those are necessary in supply chain. Critical thinking is more of a process and above process in developing your thinking in your supply chain. It is a disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to a belief and action. Critical thinkers have a healthy skepticism toward solutions to complex problems and do not accept everything at face value. The focus of critical thinking is on logic and the scientific method. So let's talk about characteristics common to all supply chains. And I've got the SCOR model up here first because that's one of the characteristics common to all supply chains, is that they follow the SCOR, or most of the SCOR framework of plan, source, make, deliver, return, and enable. Many retailers, et cetera, don't necessarily make. However, even at New York City Transit, we do make some things. We assemble about 180,000 kits per year, which helps us in our picking process because we're picking an entire kit rather than picking all the parts to the kits individually. We also do and fabricate a lot of our replacement parts for especially for subways, subway cars, because the average life of the subway car is about 40 years. And a lot of parts end up having to be fabricated. They also consist, another common characteristic is that they consist of at least one supplier-customer combination, with most organizations in the chain usually performing both roles. In other words, as an organization, you are both a supplier to your customer and a customer to your suppliers. So, and a supply chain usually is made up of two entities or 2 to 3 entities where you're all performing both roles. And finally, they have three fundamental but critical requirements for long-term success. Fundamental number one is to minimize cost. Fundamental number two is to minimize cycle time. And fundamental number three is to maximize accuracy. These are the three fundamentals that I talk about in the title of this presentation. So the three fundamental requirements are fundamental building blocks of the supply chain. Cost measures the value to the organization. A low-cost supply chain delivers greater value to both organizations and to both the organization and its customers. It benefits both groups. Cycle time measures the organization's internal and external agility. The faster material is received, picked, and shipped, or new products and services are brought to market, and the faster information is processed, decisions made, and revenue collected, allows inventory to be minimized, as well as the cash-to-cash cycle is minimized as well. So that gains on reducing inventory investment, but also getting your cash. Finally, accuracy measures the precision of processes. Focusing on accuracy helps to balance demand and supply and to minimize uncertainty. Now, these three fundamentals are sector, product, and service agnostic. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, whether you manufacture a product or just sell a product and or service, these three fundamentals apply. So it doesn't, they're agnostic to the system. And each requirement benefits both the organization and the customer. They're required for the long-term success of all supply chains. So let's take a look in a little more deep dive into minimizing cost. As we said, minimizing supply chain costs reduces overall cost of goods sold, increasing margins, and allowing your products and services to be more competitive. Here, we focus on reducing the cost of placing an order, the cost of inventory, the cost of executing an order, and the cost of delivering an order. Some cost minimization strategies include inventory rationalization, vendor rationalization, leveraging technology, whether it's an ERP system, a WMS system, a transportation management system. Leveraging technology nowadays helps you to reduce costs and overall cycle times as well. But leveraging technology. So then implementing continuous improvement, as we said earlier, that's something that we want to continually implement continuous improvement to look at costs everywhere in the supply chain. And another area, and one of them is to focus on inbound and outbound transportation management. For example, reviewing inbound freight terms, such as many companies still use prepaid, and you might want to look at switching that to a collect system. Also, reviewing your outbound transportation network periodically as things change, because you're adding customers, you're expanding, you're closing markets, you're doing things on a continuous basis. So it's good to review your outbound transportation network as well. You want to balance supply and demand through S&OP, sales and operations planning. And focus on your organization's supply chain strengths and look at outsourcing the rest. Focus on what you do best and outsource to other companies that are better at doing such things. Periodically update your network design. Fundamental number 2, minimizing cycle time, minimizes or makes the organization more agile and responsive, improving the overall customer experience. Minimizing cycle time for all cycles. It includes customer orders, such as time to place an order, time to execute an order, and time to deliver an order to a customer. Also supplier orders, time to place an order with a new supplier, the time to place an order for a new product, time to place a replenishment order. All of these things, you can always work on reducing the cycle time for any of these things. And also with new products, the time to deliver a new prototype for review, the time to deliver a new product to market. All of these things, by minimizing the time it takes to do these processes, makes your organization more agile and responsive and more competitive. Some of these minimization strategies include use of multiple suppliers, always having a backup, use of local suppliers to minimize your travel times. You can even consolidate suppliers if you feel like you have too many covering the same product. You can change your order frequency, either bringing in material that is high demand material in more often, or taking low demand material and bringing and low value material in less frequently. You can implementing continuous improvement to improve your operations, and expand your supply chain visibility. Invest in IT decision tools, and invest in implement advanced shipping notification, collaborative planning, forecast, and replenishment. Say that 3 times fast. And partnering with customers and suppliers. All of these things help to minimize and focus cycle time. In addition, you can look at minimizing warehouse throughput, such as dock to stock and pick to deliver times. You can minimize travel times and distances within your warehouse, between warehouses, minimizing dwell times, the time it takes or the material just sits and does nothing. Standardized materials, standardized processes, co-locate material that is often picked together, and implement incentives in your operation. All of these things can be used to leverage cycle time minimization. And finally, communicate. As you implement, as you improve, or as you don't improve, make sure that information gets communicated through the organization so that you can continually improve and celebrate successes and focus on issues where things are not going as well. Fundamental number 3 is maximizing accuracy. Maximizing accuracy is more than just picking accuracy. Maximizing accuracy means being precise in every process and at every step in the supply chain. It minimizes uncertainty and positively impacts customer service. Remember, 84% of customers will not return after just one poor delivery experience. Recently had a situation where here at home where my wife purchased a product. It was a roll-away bed, a folding bed, and she did all her research. She did and looked for the best possible bed that she could get that had the best quality, etc. And she purchased it. It was a great price, and she purchased it. It comes to our apartment, and it had the wrong size mattress on it. And so, that really, kind of upset her. And, and of course, this happened on a Friday afternoon. We received the material, so we had to wait till Monday to be able to call customer service. Well, she calls customer service on Monday, and they said, "Oh, we'll just send you a new mattress." And I said, "Fine. And what do you want with the old mattress?" "Oh, just keep it. It cost them too much to return it to us." But evidently they were having problems because they were picking the wrong mattress and inserting it in there into a frame that was too big. So now we're stuck. We did get the new mattress, and it works fine. Everything's happy. But we're also stuck with a mattress that's too small that we don't really necessarily want. So, it's one of those things where, well, if we were going to buy something from this company again or needed another folding bed somewhere in the future, we might not use them again because, they really didn't do that great a job. They did, their customer service was fine, but it was, picking the wrong thing, and maybe there's going to be a problem where they're going to end up going out of business. Who knows? And the other thing to remember is that it costs 5 times more to acquire a new customer than it does to keep an old one. Now, this thought has been around for a long time, but it's very, very true. So you want to make sure that you're once you have a customer, that you want to keep them, as much as you can for life. Because accuracy is a function of visibility. High accuracy requires high visibility in the supply chain. I don't think that the manufacturer of this bed, when they had a very good visibility into their picking operations, when they picked the wrong items or the wrong mattress. Fundamental number 3, maximization strategies, include such things as implementing internal accuracy programs, such as receiving accuracy, put away accuracy, picking accuracy, shipping accuracy. These types of accuracy programs, you need to be careful because who they report to is important. You want to keep them independent of warehouse operations. So you don't want your accuracy control manager reporting to your warehousing manager or something along that line. Things can get pushed away, or other priorities can happen. Also order processing inventory accuracy is also important, to make sure that your order processing is done at a high level of accuracy. You also want to be able to implement continuous improvement in this area as well. And also implement external accuracy programs, because internal accuracy programs face the company, and they're great, but customers don't see them. What customers see are the external accuracy programs. One of them is implementing a perfect order index through the use of surveys, and also possibly using a star rating. These strategies, perfect order index, for example, measures suppliers and customers measured for suppliers and customers by order, and it's your on time, order shipped on time, or delivered on time. Delivered on time, delivered complete, delivered damage-free, delivered error-free. And if you can measure those items, those 4 items, and multiply them together, it has an effect. For example, if you were 95% accurate in all of those 4 areas, your perfect order index would really only be 81.5%. So keep that in mind. But it's a great humbling experience, because people who are or companies that are on time may not be shipping complete. They may not be shipping damage-free, and their billing and everything else might not be 100% error-free. So that's a great way to implement or to measure customer accuracy. I recently saw an article that was talking about delivery windows, so delivery time at, I believe it was Walmart. They're now requiring their vendors going from, I believe, 95% to 97% on-time delivery. And that's going to be going to be a tough thing, especially for those that don't deliver as often, because they're going to have to really step up their game. The star rating is, similar to what you see in Amazon, etc. Where you get feedback forms, or different organizations where you can get you can rate them 1 to 5 stars or whatever. So those are the types of things. Surveys as well, just being able to send a survey out and get it back is another great way. So we talked about how to catch excellence. So how to do that is simple, or is not. It's simple in concept. So keep your supply chain simple in concept. Focus on the fundamentals: minimizing cost, minimizing cycle time, minimizing accuracy. Utilize best practices that align with your corporate goals. Implement continuous improvement. Leverage critical thinking. Question everything. Measure. Get your KPIs. Be transparent. Some concluding thoughts. Perfection is an ideal, but excellence is attainable. Let's focus on being excellent in everything that we do and not being perfect. Implement continuous improvement whenever you can. If you don't have a continuous improvement program, work on the processes of getting something implemented. Use critical thinking to evaluate your decisions. Focus on the fundamentals. And by simultaneously minimizing cost and cycle time while maximizing the accuracy of all processes, in the long run, you can catch excellence in your supply chain. So with that, I'll open it up, Scott, and open it for questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Gary. Really appreciate your perspective. To our audience, please type in your questions and/or comments in the chat toolbar on the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we'll pose those to Gary. So, Gary, we've had a kind of a flurry of activity here. Leading off, Sandra wanted to weigh in with a comment. She really liked your supply chains are simple but conceptually fully aligned and KPIs understood by every stakeholder. That commentary you shared early on, that really resonated with her. So she appreciated your perspective there. Before I pose you another question, Gary, you want to weigh in with any additional commentary on why it's important that everyone understands the KPIs of how we're measuring success?
Yeah, and thanks for the comment there, Sandra. The great thing about this is what it does by making sure everybody understands what the KPIs are and how they're calculated, is that it eliminates excuses. It says everybody knows how it's calculated, so there's no gamesmanship in playing with the, there's nobody can play with your numbers. You can play with your own numbers to try to tell a different story. The thing is, I've always believed that if I can improve, if I see the numbers and I publish the numbers, I can always improve the numbers. And the interesting thing is, thing about benchmarking is, one of the things I always said about that was that by posting your numbers and comparing it to somebody else, that's one thing, but nobody ever does everything the same. This way, if you post them, and this is part of the transparency, if you post them, then what happens is you can see improvement, or you can see where you're not improving, and you can get the collective genius of the organization to be able to come in and say, hey, why don't you try this? I mean, I've never seen a great idea I didn't want to steal. And so, I say that facetiously, but I'm willing to let other people help me improve my operation. And so that's one of the reasons why I talk about that. And it also falls into communicate.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And Sandra, thanks for participating. Gary, Sandra also has a question for you. So I want to pose this to you here. So Gary, in your experience, how do you handle marketing and sales poor engagement towards product rationalization efforts? And she goes on to ask, for high-tech and medical industry, speed to market is their focus, but it can leave behind a debacle of slow and obsolete risk exposure. Any ideas there, Gary?
Well, hang on a second. Let me make sure I understand the question, Scott. Mm-hmm. You're in the medical field. You're trying to get products to market very quickly, but it leaves behind what's happening with your other processes.
Right, and in particular, Sandra asked about when sales and marketing is not really engaged in the product rationalization efforts. So how do we start to address that?
Well, yeah, because sales and marketing wants more. If you're offering two of the same model, they want 10. Different colors and different sizes and shapes. This is where, at least in my opinion, this goes back to communicate, but also sales and operations planning, where you get all the people, get people who can make the decisions all in the same room and educate them on, what's happening in such a way that when you explain to them, well, what you're doing here, here's how it affects my operation and how that affects the whole organization, the organization as a whole. Because if you're slowing down the supply chain or causing the supply chain to, to find other ways to speed up, like more overtime, more hiring more people that are not necessary, et cetera, just by to get a different product out there that's not conceptually different from anything else in the market, then you have a problem. And this is where it's best to put things out on the table. Also to get everybody to understand, using not only the same plan in sales and operations planning, but using the same terms that mean the same thing. One of the things that I'm constantly trying to do in my organization is get people to understand that, what terms mean. Different terms in different organizations mean different things. And I'm saying within transit. So buses uses a term that means something different to supply chain that means something different to subways. So, even though it's the same term. And what we need to do is make sure that we have the same definitions for things.
Mm. Absolutely, and not to make this a commercial about ASCM and APICS, but one of the biggest advantages for organizations that put their teams into APICS certification training is to be able to rally around a common language and a common vocabulary. It's exactly what Gary's speaking to. So, a great question, Sandra. Really appreciate the commentary and your interest. So moving right along here, Hazem, yes. We are going to be sending out a PDF of Gary's a PDF version of Gary's PowerPoint in the next couple of days to all of our registrants. So you'll get a copy of that. And Gary, here's an interesting question that comes from our friend Bill Stankiewicz, who's a board member with the APIC Savannah chapter, amongst other things.
Yes, Bill's on my LinkedIn. So yes, I read his comments and see his things with interest.
Absolutely. Good people down there. So Bill asked, what 3 new best practice items have you learned from other municipalities that you have networked or benchmarked with?
Well, one of the things is, and this is it's a good question. One of the things is leveraging. One of the things is leveraging new technology, because this is something that some organizations do fairly well and others don't. And then you got to understand something. When you're dealing in the public sector, a lot of your funding comes from taxpayers. And whether that taxpayer is a local person in New York City or whether he's in Savannah, Georgia, that's still, we do get federal funding, we get state funding, we get local funding, and everybody, nobody wants to raise taxes. But the problem is, in some cases, we've dealt with, and one of the things that we're working on right now is I'm luckily being federally funded in order to implement a new warehouse management system, because our current warehouse management system is really just an inventory system, but it was originally developed in the 1980s. It's a COBOL program in a green screen program. Back in the old days when IT was, it's everything, every change in your screen cost, took 6 months and cost $600,000. So now we're in the process of being able to implement a brand new warehouse management system. So what we're doing is looking at what other organizations are doing and the best practices out there, and we're taking from other organizations, but we're also taking public organizations, but we're also looking at what are the best practices in some private sector organizations. So, and then what that focuses in on is reducing costs, reducing cycle time, and increasing accuracy.
Great question, Bill. Appreciate that, and of course, I always appreciate your engagement and participation. Bill co-hosts our Savannah Business Leadership Series down in that sprawling logistics market. Okay.
Savannah's one of my favorite cities, Bill.
Oh, it's gorgeous. All right, so here's another interesting question. So this comes from Akshay, and they ask, as a supply chain professional that's interested in moving further to grow the knowledge of supply chain management, what courses would you recommend that they take, or what to read, or what resources to further their knowledge is what Akshay is asking, Gary.
Well, one of the things that I would do if you're not certified, and I'm plugging my own area here first. If you're not certified, look at what certifications are out there, especially APIC certifications, that can improve where you're focused in on. So, for example, if you're looking at things, if you're in manufacturing, you may want to look at the CPIM. If you're in warehousing and distribution, you may want to look at CLTD. However, if you're looking at more of a broad scope, you may be looking at the CSCP. Any of those are great places to look for supply chain. The other thing is I recommend reading as much as you can about different things. One in supply chain and in management. I look forward to getting, for example, one of the things that I got myself was a subscription to Harvard Business Review. And the Harvard Business Review, while it talks about management in general, it does have a lot of focus on supply chain. And there's a lot of great articles in there that can improve your expansion and knowledge of supply chain management and leadership in general. Because as supply chain professionals, many of us, the goal is to become leaders within our organization. And leadership is something that I believe, is learned. It's not an innate gift, and it needs to be worked on and honed on every day. But also, anything you can, anything that you're looking at, whether it's sales and operations planning, whether it's IT related work, and there's a number of things that I'm working on right now and reading from a supply chain. And if you send me an email, I'll share some of those books and titles with you. I didn't put it on here, but you can email me at gary.smith@nyct.com. Again, that's gary.smith@nyct.com.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Gary. And great question, Akshay. Thanks for participating. So unfortunately, we've got a number of additional questions teed up. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I do want to pose this question here to you, Gary. And this is from Giuseppe, who is an APIX and ASCM member in Italy. And he asked, does SCOR, and for our listeners, SCOR as in SCOR, and Gary will speak to this here in a second, does SCOR help to build supply chains for developing smart cities programs?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know, Giuseppe. I think that I'd have to look into it. Again, send me some information and I'll be happy. Again, we're on LinkedIn together, so I think that if it's something that you and I can talk about, I'll be happy to. But I'm not sure exactly how. I don't have an answer for you. Let me put it that way.
Fantastic. So Giuseppe, shoot me and Gary a note on that. We'll see if we can't help find you an answer or some more background around that. Great question. One quick comment from Shelley, Gary. Shelley really enjoyed not only your presentation, but in particular the supply chain elevator speech. I thought that was very neat. So, and Shelley is a former APIX Atlanta board member. Great to have you on here with us here, Shelley. All right, one final question for you, Gary. And this comes from Jonathan, who is plugged in with the Atlanta chapter. He's going to be a future webinar presenter, as a matter of fact. And Jonathan asked, how accepting are team members when it comes to continuous improvement? And then a follow-up, what do you find that motivates the team to go through the change and see it through to success?
The first part of the question, Scott, say that the first part of the question again.
How how accepting are team members when it comes to continuous improvement in your experience? And then he asked, how do you go about motivating them to get involved in basically the change management, the project, the effort, and see it through?
I've found people, again, if you ask them to be very accepting to, focusing on the problem. And this is the key, is that if you focus on the problem and you're not saying, well, marketing's really screwing us up, or, geez, if production would just get their act together, you got to, what we need to do is when you decide who you need to put in the room together that can make a decision, and you have to approach it as a problem-centric, situation. In other words, there is a problem. Here is what it's doing, how it's affecting us. We had a situation, I'll try to make this real quick, but we had a situation years ago where in our kitting operation where everybody hated us. We were getting the wrong kits. We were getting enough kits out, but we finally realized that we were getting the wrong kits out, and we were focusing on production and not what was actually being done. And when we got people in the room together, we started this meeting every 2 weeks. And the first couple of weeks, we were all pointing fingers at each other and yelling at each other. But when we finally started listening to each other, we started realizing that, number one, we were talking about different things when we were using the same terms. We started putting together a whole thing of everybody working at the, understanding the same terms and everybody working together and focusing on the problem. And now, several years later, we're meeting quarterly, and we barely need to do that. Everybody, we're focused on the problem. We've solved the problems. We're continually talking to each other offline. We don't need the meetings anymore, and it's been a great experience. But you have to get the right people in the room, and you have to be focused on the problem and not the personalities.
Fantastic. Great question, Jonathan. Appreciate you sharing your perspective on that question. So to all of our other folks that submitted questions or commentaries, I wish we could get to each of them, but for the sake of time, we're going to wrap up Q&A at this point. And Gary, you'll have the information on all the other questions and commentary that was submitted. And Gary, thanks again for not only taking questions, which is always can be a challenging component, but also thanks for providing your contact information so folks can follow up with you. And of course, big thanks to all of our participants and for all your great questions. Really enjoyed. One of my favorite components of each of our webinars is certainly the Q&A session. So we're going to be concluding our session this afternoon on just a few final items. First off, we want to make sure that you're aware of I4Transport's 3PL and Supply Chain Summit here in Atlanta in June 2019. EFT is bringing some of the biggest industry names right here to the hashtag Supply Chain City for 3 days of thought leadership and executive level networking. Supply Chain Now Radio is very pleased to be serving not only as a media partner, but we're going to be broadcasting live from the event thanks to our friends at Becker Logistics, and you can check them out at beckerlogistics.com. To learn more about this event, because registration is still open, you can check out events.eft.com, or you can click on the hyperlink that will be on this slide of Gary's deck, and it'll take you straight to the event. Secondly, you can check out our website for our upcoming webinars, podcasts, and events. We hope that you'll tune in tomorrow for at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and again at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time for the latest installment of our Today in Manufacturing series, podcast series on Supply Chain Now Radio. In fact, we have recently been sponsored by IntelliTrans, which is a really interesting company that is, believe it or not, the largest provider of rail visibility, where it manages the movements of over 650,000 rail cars per month, which is 40% of the North American market. Holy cow. We had a demo earlier this week and was really blown away with the level of detail and data they provide their clientele. We present our Today in Manufacturing series in partnership with the Georgia Manufacturing Alliance. And again, thanks to our friends over at IntelliTrans for sponsoring that. You can learn more at todayinmanufacturing.com. Of course, if there's anything else we can do for you to serve as a resource, shoot us a note to Scott, SCOTT, at supplychainnowradio.com, and we will make sure that we will track down the information you're looking for. Hey, Gary, before we conclude today's session, any final thoughts on your end to our audience?
Well, just as a thought, and again, it kind of goes back to focusing on the basics. We have a tendency, all of us as supply chain professionals and people who are into IT and all of our different areas, to get really, really overcomplicated sometimes. The whole point is to be able to step back, take a breath, and break it down into smaller bites, and focusing in on am I going to be able to minimize my cost? Can I shorten my cycle times? And can I improve my accuracy? And again, as we look at things, those are while they're not glamorous things to do, they're not sexy things to do, they are the right things to do. And you can do a lot of other things that are still, but when it gets down to those three things, that's what you're really, the focus is on improving supply chains. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time, and it's been a great opportunity for me, and I thank you all for taking the time to listen.
Fantastic. So as we wrap up today, we want to give a big thank you to Gary Smith for joining us and sharing his perspective. One of the things I love about Gary's insights and perspective is it's very practical. It's not high-level conceptual. It's practical things that will improve your supply chain performance. Those are my favorite types of presentations. A big thanks to our sponsors, Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. Of course, a big thank you to our audience. We had great engagement today. Really appreciate the comments and the questions. On behalf of Supply Chain Now Radio, this is Scott Luton concluding today's episode, and we hope to reconnect with you again real soon. Have a great week, everybody.